Well, hello everyone. I'm Grundmann. I'm the founder and director of the National Straight Pride Coalition. We're at our August 8th meeting of 2020 in preparation for 3 weeks from today when we'll have the second Straight Pride event, March event, parade in the history of our nation. And it'll be at Modesto, here in Modesto in front of Planned Parenthood. And so the reasons for that I'll get into in just a moment. Before I forget, I wanted to mention that at that event, just as at last year, we were opposed by people who called us everything under the sun. When we first came out, a couple months before the event, we were immediately called racist by a city councilwoman. That we were so-called white supremacists, and that was the song which our enemies played, and they sang it to the media, and so that came across the country that we were so-called racist. And the relevance to that at that time was we were in front, at that time, just as we will be this year, we were protesting Planned Parenthood that time, just as we will again and continuously. And why were we protesting at Planned Parenthood? Because if you go to blackgenocide.org, you'll find the documentation that Planned Parenthood has killed more than 20 million blacks. Now think of that, 20 million blacks. Recently you've had great turmoil in our nation for the death of Mr. George Floyd a few months ago in Minneapolis. That was one black gentleman. So think of 20 million George Floyds, or 10 million George Floyds and 10 million Georgette Floyds, the female version. So that is the death toll, and that's just 20 million, but they've killed more than 20 million. They're headed on to greater numbers, which is what they find their satisfaction and happiness in. But you have the mass killing of blacks by an organization in our country which is funded by government funds, taxpayer funds, and they are a fantastic strength. They have a strength to, as I've heard many years ago, I was in Operation Rescue many years ago, and one of the statements at that time from the leaders was that your abortion clinic in any city operates by permission of the local church, and also by permission of the local authorities. So Planned Parenthood is in cities across the nation. They're well known for targeting especially minority communities. But is there a peep of resistance from the government authorities? No. They are tied in with the civic. They have enough power to be tied in with civic authorities who support them. And also our churches, per se, in this time, our Christian churches, they, by their acquiescence, again, according to the statement I heard many years ago, 30 years ago, which is still true today, Planned Parenthood is in this city and many others by agreement with the local church. They won't say a peep against it because they can so-called look bad, because their image, the churches unfortunately are far more concerned with their image than spreading the gospel and stopping the evil which attacks our citizens. So that is part of the monolith which we face. As another further example of that monolith, within the last few years we've seen that there have been exposés of Planned Parenthood where they actually sell body parts. And farther above and beyond that, they actually kill live babies in order to harvest those body parts. And what happened with those underground exposés who exposed this fantastic evil? The people who exposed that were attacked by our state government, and I believe they were successfully attacked, quote unquote, that they now have multi-million-dollar judgments against them and possible jail sentences for exposing this evil. What happened to the people who chop up the babies and sell the body parts? Nothing. So they might have gotten bad PR for saying the Lamborghini that they could get was selling the body parts. But that's all blown over, and the media, which we have an utterly corrupt media, again, one of the enemies of Christianity, is that we have a media which supports our enemies. And so the media is tied with them also, so we have a monolithic structure of evil which we're facing against. So there's much to say as far as what we're up against. We're up against a fantastically evil structure, and I need to first of all again clarify, we're going to be in front of Planned Parenthood protesting the genocide of Planned Parenthood, and our opponents will be protesting us. They will call us racist. So again, to reiterate, this has to be put out again and again. We are protesting an inherent racism of Planned Parenthood, which views in its entire history, the founder of Planned Parenthood calls blacks human weeds. Her words, not mine. And so Planned Parenthood is part of what's called race science eugenics, spreading that philosophy, which is really a religion. And so they're spreading the religion, and again, that religion I'll classify under what's called Satanism, humanism. The Straight Pride Coalition is presenting Christianity. We have a celebration of life, of everything that promotes the value of life, families, children, unborn and born, men, women, Western civilization, Christianity, all the things which build life, and our opponents have a culture of death. When you see our opponents there, they will be, again, to reiterate it again, we're opposing the genocide of black citizens in the womb. They are opposing us and calling us racist for doing that. So therefore, for those people who come to that event that day, we will be presenting a pro-life, a pro-culture of life, celebration of life, and our opponents are going poo on that. They have a culture of death. They support the death of which Planned Parenthood produces. So you have two completely contrasting things. So the people who are opposing us on the outside of the lines, they are a culture of death. They support genocide of blacks. They will not stop it. They won't lift a finger to stop it. So you can't get a more greater cultural contrast than this. So that's what's upcoming. And you'll see that our opponents will do their typical tantrums of that day. They'll have their chance to drown us out, to supposedly block. If we sing, they'll try to overcome that. It's the typical rants which you see anywhere. But they'll also have, I would predict, extra weapons. And relative to those extra weapons against us, the Modesto Police Department did a fantastic job of protecting us, because our enemies imported what we now know is in our culture as Antifa last time. And Antifa is a communist organization. They are dedicated to destruction. Wherever Antifa goes, they're dedicated to destroying things. They are totally incapable of building anything. They are a culture of death in and of themselves. Their dedication is to tear down the structures of our nation. So you'll have Antifa and all their friends who are dedicated. If they were able to get a chance, they would physically attack us. But again, the Modesto police did a fantastic job of neutralizing them. But in the advancement of the culture of death, one thing I want to warn our members on our side against is this is especially in Portland, but it's going to go around the country. And I'm referring to lasers. And so lasers have been used extensively in Portland to try to blind the federal agents. And I've seen pictures of them, and we're not talking about one or two. Well, the picture I saw was at least 10 lasers aimed at however many federal agents were. So we're going to have a daylight event which will dissipate the power of the laser. But I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and I use lasers commonly in my practice. And I know that there can be a physiological benefit. Say if one of our members here had a physiological condition which needed the laser to assist them. I could shine a laser to where I am across the room and hit them, and they would have a positive, if I hit the right spot, it will have a positive physiological effect on them regarding whatever condition they may have. So I don't know enough of my physics to say in the daylight how the laser, if one of our attackers was attacking us again at this distance between us from one side of the room to the other, if they shine a laser dissipates over distance, but could they have theoretically a negative physiological effect if they hit our eyes? I'm open to the possibility. I frankly haven't studied it, but our enemies will try to get as close as they can to overcome those deficits of distance. And so I'm saying that lasers can be one of the weapons used against us, which was not, this was not, to my knowledge, part of Antifa's armament against people last year at this time, but they've so-called advanced in their attacks to destroy and hurt people. Again, whenever you see Antifa, they're there to hurt people. They're there to hurt people or burn property and destruction. But especially they enjoy hurting people. And so I wanted to put out that warning for our supporters who show up that day, and typically Antifa will work in packs. They will be, say, one person who can shine the laser real quick, and then they'll put it back in their pocket or whatever, and then they'll try to drown themselves in a surrounding group of their fellows. So, because Antifa is always very cowardly, but just to see, if you see people with that suspicious idea, they can momentarily pull out a laser and try to shoot any of us in the eyes. They'll probably shoot for myself or Reverend Jesse or Pastor Bruce, but theoretically any of us can be afflicted by this. So to give you a heads up, if you see this, we need to stop them. We need to identify them to the police immediately. Mm-hmm. And I'm also chairman of the Constitution Party in California. I'm going to call up my web person and ask for I believe we should have a national campaign. I don't know the laws regarding it, but I believe it should be a felony to try to attack a person with a laser for their against their eyesight. And I would recommend that the federal agents who are being afflicted this way, if they don't have it in their armamentarium, I would encourage them to shoot to kill. Because these are people this is beyond normal protest. Just as within the last few days in Portland, they tried to burn down a police station again, but they knew the police were in it. So they were deliberately trying to kill the police and of course the mayor up in Portland, who I think they're in day 77 of protests now in a row, which will go to November 3rd at least or 4th. The mayor was decrying that they were trying to kill police when he has been the supporter. He's been uplifting the protesters all this time to where they've been violent. Mm-hmm. And now suddenly, if they try to kill police again, he tries to cover his posterior in the common language and make an excuse for himself to say, "Oh, isn't that terrible?" Well, he's been encouraging them all the way. So we have government forces who are encouraging this anarchy and attacks in other cities. Fortunately, we have a sane police department here and sheriff's department in Modesto. Very sane. And also that to this time, Antifa might have advanced their tactics with lasers, but they're generally lazy people. And so that's why it's easy enough for them to walk out of their rat holes up in Seattle and Portland and get close to a protest. But there were relatively few of them who came over to Modesto last year compared to the numbers that could. If we went to San Francisco or or Berkeley or some common place where they congregate, you'd see a lot more of them coming out of their holes than we saw in Modesto. So we have a natural advantage of the laziness of our opponents, but we still have to be aware of their evil, which will be attacking us. With that being said, I want to backtrack that. Our main effort that you see on our flyers is to challenge Planned Parenthood for its death of black citizens. And because white supremacy in our nation has sprung from Planned Parenthood, you hear so much about white supremacy and such white superiority, and we have in our flyer, for those of you who haven't seen it, it is there's a black and white version, but it explains the evil of Planned Parenthood, the philosophical evil behind it. But they are killing blacks, but that is only part of a comprehensive program against our society and nation. All the other points we mentioned on this flyer, masculinity, femininity, they're saying that being a man, there's something wrong naturally with being a man. If you're born as a boy, there's something automatically wrong with you, especially if you're white from the first second that you're born. And so we're saying, like on this flyer, all lives matter. And people have been fired for that, and that is called a racist statement in our times, to say that all lives matter. What I'm leading to is that we are protesting in particular the fantastic evil of Planned Parenthood, but that's only one of the many evils afflicting our society, which our posts are addressed. In a celebration of life, we're celebrating Western civilization and Christianity versus our opponents, Satanism and humanism. And to back up to people who don't know about us, if you go to nationalstraightpridecoalition.org, you will see a whole bunch of baby pictures at the beginning of our website. Our primary purpose is to stop the attack of what I refer to as the LGBT war machine against those children, to destroy them, not just physically molest them, which is secondary, but to destroy their souls, because we're in a spiritual battle. And that's what, and a common manifestation of that is drag queen story hours, which you've heard, we've discussed previously, but for our new listeners, if you hear what a drag queen story hour is, that's where you have a degenerate drag queen speaking to children. The cover story is that they're teaching the children to read. The real story is that they're acclimating these children to accept degeneracy. And they're promoting degeneracy to these children to break them in their spirit. This is part of a very long-term plan, because when you can break them in their spirit, that is when it's easy enough to molest them. So what you're like putting them in the oven to tenderize them, and you're setting them up for molestation later. And this is exactly what the LGBT movement is doing. In fact, I've discussed it before, but just as a quick synopsis, when we have the LGBT war machine, it is based again on a religious foundation. Just as our movement for celebration of life is Christianity and our standard bearer is Christ, the LGBT movement is based on the opposite religion of Satanism, humanism. Their standard bearer is Lucifer, and historically their standard bearer as a physical person was known as the Marquis de Sade. And the Marquis de Sade was dedicated to breaking taboos, what were called taboos. That would be Christian religious ideas, such as protecting the family, protecting the children from sexual abuse, protecting our daughters. And so to the Marquis de Sade, if he could break those taboos, they were made to be broken. For a Satanist, a humanist, those taboos or Christian religious beliefs are made to be broken. Mm-hmm. And that is where they get their satisfaction and happiness in doing that. The ultimate satisfaction to break down our culture, because this is a cultural attack, is to break down our ability to protect children, and that's why they're working toward what they're leaning toward is child sex, the legalization of child sex. And it's only a matter of time until that happens. So, because if you look at recent Supreme Court decisions, we have so-called conservative Justice Roberts, who is joining the so-called liberal faction of the court, and we have Mr. Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, that was it. And I would present to you that they are not so-called reliable conservatives. I would present to you that if we had a case before us today, this day, and we had the legalization of child sex as a civil right for the child, because our enemies are going to frame it in such a way to make that the child has a civil right to have sex whenever they want to, with whomever they want to. And my prediction is that we would lose, our side would lose, because the court will be stacked against us. So in that sense, the court we can't look to the Supreme Court for any quote-unquote salvation to stop this evil from overtaking our children. We have to do it, and we have to do it in a unique way. We have to have a groundswell of citizens in our nation which rise up and say, this is not going to happen. We are not going to allow this to happen. No matter what you say, we're going to stop you. And what makes that so unique, unfortunately unique, is that if you look at the current political landscape in our nation, you'll see that, I'll call it the rodents, my collective term for our Satanist humanist enemies. They will have street protests all over the place, such as Seattle, Portland, you see it Oakland, even Salt Lake, across New York, fill in the blank, Atlanta. They will have street protests. What protests will the Christian church do against these? My answer to you is, based on our current recent historical evidence, zero. That if we go back in the history of our country, we had many pastors. I only remember the Pastor Witherspoon, I believe his name was. Yeah. But this was at the time of the revolution of our nation. Pastors were the community leaders. They were the pillars of where the community goes, and they were the inspirers of the citizens. And if I remember Pastor Witherspoon's story accurately, he preached, he was in Concord or Lexington. He preached his sermon. Then he said, now the sermon's over. He took off his clerical garb and he had a militia uniform under it. And he was out there to lead the citizens and the militia in the battle. So Pastors were citizen leaders at that time. They were teachers of the Word of God. They were actually pillars of the community. Again, I can't say that enough. And fast forward to our time, and I'm saying there are many hardworking pastors out there, but let me qualify that with: do my listeners know of any pastor you could say, hey, that's a community leader? He stands out all over the place. He's always at front. He's out leading the community. Do we know that anymore? And they're probably out there. I don't know that. Off the top of my head, I would say Christian and being in many demonstrations, Christianity and led by Christian pastors, they retired from the battlefield. They are within the four walls of the church and they will not go out. Now that can happen for various reasons, various cultural reasons, because as my friends and I who have been in many demonstrations, after our protests, we always said, where were the pastors? And there were 99.9% of the time, there were no pastors joining us. Why was that? Because in our current cultural situation, pastors can have a very difficult time because they are hampered by boards of directors who they have to answer to. They have 501c3. You have a government bureaucracy which weighs down on the pastors. So I can recognize that it's hampering them. But also that pastors inherently are being trained to not fight. They're not back in the Revolutionary War, and so you don't see them out in the streets. You don't see them opposing so-called pride parades across the nation, sodomite pride parades. You'll see them opposing us in our straight pride parade because they're fake churches, for one thing. But what I'm leading to is the Christian church in our country has been neutralized. And so when the pastors are neutralized, you have the congregants who are neutralized, and everyone will not go out in the street and do what's necessary. That is why there will not, at this current time, there will not be a national movement such as we need to when the Supreme Court is threatening to legalize child sex in the future. If current conditions now exist, then we will not have a national movement. So that's why, in order to save our nation, we have to have a fantastic reversal of where we've been. We have to be willing to go out and fight. And so the straight pride parade is part of, we are going to the streets to fight. We are going in front of Planned Parenthood to say this is an evil organization. So we're fighting everybody under the sun. We're fighting the media, which will say that we're racist, who will lie, endless lies about us. They will not report, except in the most cursory fashion, the real reasons why we're out here. They won't report how many people know that Planned Parenthood was founded on racism. How many people know that Planned Parenthood, the founder called black. In our current culture, if you make a peep, you say a wrong Twitter statement from, I don't know, 5 years ago, or fill in the blank, or a wrong Facebook statement, you have a whole socially engineered crowd who can say, Joe Entertainer, Ernie Entertainer, 5 years ago, he made this statement on Facebook, and it sounds racist to us. And then, of course, Ernie Entertainer has to come out typically and will say, yes, I'm so sorry, I apologize, and Ernie Entertainer will be made, in order to save their job, they will have to lick the bottoms of the shoes of their accusers if they survive at all, if they aren't totally wiped out. So it's what we know as a cancel culture. So any accusation against you can turn against you. So we're being socially engineered to shut up. And so Christians, unfortunately, have been socially engineered for years. Pastors being socially engineered. So, my friends, this is the reverse. We're looking for straight pride events across the country because we need to culturally reverse the collapse of a Christian response to evil. And so, when we accomplish that, this what we're talking about is we're going up against this fantastic monolithic machine which is threatening to destroy our country in so many different ways. I can't emphasize that enough. That this is part of a movement which is not there now. If you look at our cultural landscape, there really is no organized movement against the sodomite war machine. It's all collapsed. The Mormon Church has collapsed. They might not agree with that, but If you look at this, if you look at the reality, in California, the Mormon Church passed Prop 2000 in 2008. They passed Prop 8 to support sodomite marriage. That would never have passed without the Mormon Church. But after that, they were viciously attacked, and they retired from the battlefield. And so that's why you never hear any criticism of the Mormon Church anymore. Because the sodomites know. Why criticize what's not going to block you? Because the Mormon Church has capitulated. If you look at Salt Lake, they have sodomite housing laws, which were enacted with the support of the Mormon Church. So the Mormon Church, theologically, they might say, "Oh, we're always opposed to homosexuality. We're just as before. So what you're saying is false." So theologically, they may still hold on paper the same views, but in reality, they have shut up, and so the sodomites know this. So that's why the forces of life, the culture of life, is being mowed down like a lawnmower, grass in front of a lawnmower. And so that's why it's so important for you to join us in our Straight Pride Parade, because we're establishing the family, we're establishing men and women, we're establishing the culture of life for our whole nation. And we invite you to join the battle. Are there any questions at any time, or did I explain it all to our friend? Yes.
Mr. Grundmann, could you explain in your own words why you think, to the people watching here and to us, but why do you think with your group helping, trying to put away with Planned Parenthood, why is it these other groups that are out, Black Lives Matter, marching, saying Black Lives Matter, why is it that they're calling your group a hate group when you're trying to help them?
That is a fantastic question, which there's multiple parts to fully answer your question. One is that Black Lives Matter is a fake group. If you go to the website of Black Lives Matter, you'll find that they support, it was founded by 3 lesbians who openly, not in my words, but their words, they say they're dedicated, trained Marxists. So what does that mean? Marx, if you look at his commentaries on blacks, he called them, in his own words, he called them degenerates. So Marx was no Joe Equality. He was the reverse. He would poo on black people. And so you have these people who claim to be there for the black community. It's a slogan. But what is the reality of that? The reality of that is that they are teaching the reverse. In their own website, they despise the family. They're looking for a community family, just like Hillary Clinton. And being lesbians, inherently, they hate men. And I forget the commentaries on their site, but so that is in total contrast to the Grand Marshal of our event is Reverend Jesse Lee Peterson. He started an organization called Bond, and he's still the leader of it. It's called Brotherhood of New Destiny. And the motto of them was rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. So here's a black gentleman who started this to rebuild the black family, because in his recognition, the current problems of the black community, where they're shooting the hell out of each other in fill in the blanks, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, black on black crime, of all the crimes against blacks, I think at minimum 85%, if not 90 plus, are committed by blacks. Mass majority of murders of blacks are committed by blacks. So he's saying that all these things, their taproot is the collapse of the family. And the collapse of the family leads from the collapse of men. So he is dedicated to, just as we are, we're celebrating masculinity, to rebuild the family by rebuilding the man. And so, in answer to your question, the Black Lives Matter is a total fake. But they have actually, if you look at the monetary, how much money have they gotten? They've gotten at least $500 million in donations. Think about that. $500 million. A fantastic amount of money. And where's it all gone? Nobody knows where it's gone. But it shows that it pays to be a communist. But especially, you have the powers that be, the banking people who are behind this. They will shovel money to a communist group which is dedicated to destroying the family. Why would that be? Because that group is anti-Christian. Black Lives Matter is anti-Christian, and the people who donate to them are anti-Christian. It's part of this idea to break down the Christian family, not only in the black community but across the culture. But so that's just an idea of Black Lives Matter is a fantastic fake. They are to fake out the black community, because normally Joe and Jane Sixpack of any race would say Black Lives Matter. Oh, of course they matter. Everybody knows that. And so people will unwittingly donate to this group without realizing the evil that they represent, and that they're actually harming the black community. But that is because they're designed that way to be fake out people. And they don't care about all the 20 million blacks that have been killed by Planned Parenthood, because Black Lives Matter supports Planned Parenthood totally, completely. And the people who, you have to look at this, that the people who support Planned Parenthood are the same people who are donating to Black Lives Matter. And so it's called playing both sides against the middle, that if you have so-called racism in our country, and then you come out with a group that says, oh, we're here to stop racism. The people who are the actual racists and the people who are there to stop them can have their money supplied by the same people. Why? Because they're there. Black Lives Matter is only there to promote racial disharmony and to make conflict between the races. Christianity says that all men are brothers in Christ. So Christianity works to bring all of humanity together as one. But Black Lives Matter being anti-Christian and Planned Parenthood being anti-Christian, they work opposite, because they both had the same religion. Black Lives Matter is founded on Satanism, humanism, just like Marxism did, just like Planned Parenthood is. So when you strip away the cultural veneer, the religious philosophies are what motivates them. And so Planned Parenthood, Black Lives Matter could care less. You won't find a peep about them about abortion. So they could care less about 20 million killed. And did that answer your question adequately?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other comments, ideas? Yes.
I know we're getting ready to have lunch, Don, so can we pick it up after, and people can rejoin us
Sure.
in a little bit, and we'll do another live.
That's good. Well,
Awesome.
thank you for your time, and please join us on the 29th, 3 weeks from today. Thank you.